Rain hammered the windows of Ashford Manor the night Eleanor Whitmore arrived unannounced, her carriage wheels sinking into mud, her hands trembling around a sealed letter that would change 2 lives forever. She did not wait for the butler to properly announce her. She walked straight past him, water dripping from her cloak onto the marble floor, and found the Duke standing alone in his study, staring into a dying fire as if it held answers no one else could give him. "Your Grace," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "My father is dead, and he left me a letter with your name written on it 3 times. Sebastian Ashford turned slowly. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that had gone slightly gray at the temples, though he was barely past 30. His eyes were the kind that had seen too much loss to be surprised by anything anymore. Yet something about this soaked, furious young woman, standing in his study at 9 in the evening, made him set down his glass. "I do not know you," he said carefully. "You knew my father, Dr. Whitmore. He treated your daughter for the fever 2 winters ago. He treated your late wife before she passed." Eleanor's voice caught slightly on the last word, but she pushed forward, refusing to let grief slow her down. "He wrote to me before he died. He said he made you a promise, and now I am here to see it kept." The Duke's jaw tightened. He remembered Dr. Whitmore well. A quiet, observant man who had sat with him during the worst nights of his life and never once offered empty comfort, only honesty. "What promise?" Eleanor stepped forward and placed the letter on his desk. Her hands were still shaking, not from cold now, but from the weight of what she was about to say. "He told me you needed a wife. Not for love. He said love was a luxury men like you could no longer afford. Not with the estate the way it is. Not with a daughter growing up without a mother to guide her. He said a marriage of good sense, between 2 people who understood duty, would save this house and save your daughter's future." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rain against the glass. "And you agreed to this," Sebastian said slowly, "to come here and offer yourself like a piece of furniture." Eleanor's chin lifted, and for the first time, something like fire flashed in her eyes. "I agreed to nothing yet. I came because my father asked me to, and because I have seen what happens to estates that fall into ruin, and to children who grow up unloved. I have spent my whole life watching my father heal people who could not help themselves. I know how to run a household. I know how to manage money. I know how to care for a sick child. What I do not know, Your Grace, is whether you are a man worth trusting with my future." Sebastian almost laughed, though there was no humor in it, only disbelief. No one spoke to him this way anymore. Since his wife's death, the world had treated him like something fragile, something to be handled with soft words and careful silences. This woman, dripping rainwater onto his expensive carpet, spoke to him as if he were simply a man who needed to be reasoned with. "You are bold," he said. "I am tired," Eleanor corrected. "Tired of watching good families fall apart because pride keeps them from making sensible choices. My father believed you were a good man, buried under grief and debt. He believed I could help you dig yourself out, if you would let me." The Duke walked around his desk, studying her properly now. Her dress was simple, practical, the kind a working woman wore, not the silk and lace of the ladies who usually sought his attention for his title alone. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold and from anger. She was not beautiful in the fashionable sense, but there was something arresting about her, something unshaken. "You understand what marriage to me would mean," he said. "There is no love here, Miss Whitmore. I buried the only woman I ever loved 3 years ago, and I have no intention of pretending otherwise for the sake of comfort. If we did this, it would be an arrangement, nothing more." "I never asked for more," Eleanor replied, though something in her chest tightened as she said it. "I asked for a chance to keep a promise to my father, and to make sure a little girl does not grow up as alone as I once feared I would." At the mention of his daughter, Sebastian's expression shifted, just slightly, the ice cracking for a moment. "Lily," he murmured. "I have heard she is clever, and lonely, and that her governess left last spring with no one willing to take the position since." Eleanor's voice softened now, losing its edge. "I would not just be your wife, Your Grace. I would be there for her too." The Duke studied her for a long moment. Outside, the storm had begun to quiet, the rain softening to a steady patter against the windows. He thought of Lily, 6 years old, spending her evenings alone in the nursery, because he could not bear to look at her without seeing her mother's eyes staring back at him. He thought of the estate's ledgers, hidden away in his desk drawer, filled with numbers that grew worse each month. He thought of Dr. Whitmore, a man he had trusted, who had looked him in the eye once and told him grief was not a reason to let everything else he loved crumble around him. "A trial," Sebastian said finally. "You will come to Ashford Manor as a tutor for my daughter. No one will speak of marriage yet. We will see if this arrangement suits either of us before any promises are made permanent." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest, relief mixed with a strange, unexpected disappointment that she did not have time to examine. "That is fair," she said. "Understand something, Miss Whitmore." Sebastian's voice grew quiet, almost dangerous. "I have nothing soft left in me. Whatever you are hoping to find here, do not expect warmth. I cannot give what I no longer have." Eleanor met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away even as something in his tone made her heart beat faster. "I am not asking for your heart, Your Grace. I am asking for your trust, and I intend to earn it." He nodded once, sharp and final, the way a man closes a difficult negotiation. "Then it is settled. You will begin tomorrow." As Eleanor turned to leave the study, her wet boots leaving faint marks on the polished floor, she paused at the door and looked back at him. The firelight caught the sharp lines of his face, the exhaustion etched into every feature, the grief he wore like armor. For a moment, she almost softened, almost said something kind. Instead, she simply nodded and stepped out into the hallway, where a servant waited to show her to a room in the east wing. That night, Eleanor lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the last of the storm fade into stillness. She thought of her father, of the letter that had brought her here, of the promise she had made to a dying man without fully understanding what it would cost her. She thought of the Duke's cold eyes, and the flicker of something else she had seen buried beneath them, something that looked almost like hope, though he would never admit to feeling such a thing. In another wing of the house, Sebastian sat alone in his study long after Eleanor had gone to bed, the letter from Dr. Whitmore still open on his desk. He read it 3 times, his old friend's careful handwriting steady, even in his final days. The letter spoke of duty, of second chances, of a daughter who deserved to grow up in a home with laughter in it again. It spoke of Eleanor, of her intelligence and her stubborn kindness, of a young woman who had spent her whole life caring for others and had never once been cared for in return. Sebastian folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, beside the ledgers that kept him awake most nights. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that did not feel entirely gray. He did not call it hope. He was not ready for that word yet. But it was something. A small crack of light in a house that had known only shadows for far too long. Down the hall, in the nursery, a small girl named Lily pressed her ear against her door, having heard the commotion of a stranger's arrival earlier that evening. She did not know yet what it would mean for her life, only that something had shifted in the house, some tension in the air that told her things were about to change. She climbed back into bed, pulled her blanket up to her chin, and wondered, with the simple hope only a child could carry, whether the stranger downstairs might finally be the one to make her father smile again. Morning came gray and quiet, the storm having washed the world clean overnight. Eleanor rose early, dressed in her plainest gown, and made her way down to the breakfast room before anyone else had stirred. She wanted time to think, time to prepare herself for whatever this strange new life would demand of her. She had not expected, when she left her father's modest cottage 3 days ago, that she would find herself standing in the halls of a duke's estate, bound by a promise to a dying man and a stranger's cold civility. She thought of her father often that morning, of his gentle hands and his quiet wisdom, of the way he had always believed the world could be made better through small acts of care. He had spent his life healing bodies. Perhaps, Eleanor thought, she had been asked to heal something else entirely, a broken family, a grieving man, a lonely child who deserved so much more than the silence that had filled this house for far too long. She did not know yet how difficult that healing would prove to be, nor how much of her own heart she would risk in the process. She only knew that she had made a promise, and Eleanor Whitmore was not a woman who broke her word. no matter the cost. As the first light of morning spread across the manor's gardens, Eleanor stood at the window of her new room and watched the mist rise from the fields beyond. Somewhere in that great house, a duke was waking to face another day of grief he refused to name, and a little girl was dressing herself for lessons with a stranger she had not yet met, but already hoped to love. 3 lives, tangled together by a dead man's promise, were about to be tested in ways none of them could yet imagine. The trial had begun, and there was no turning back now. The first lesson with Lily did not go as Eleanor had planned. She arrived at the nursery with books tucked under her arm, ready to begin with simple reading exercises, only to find the little girl hiding beneath the window seat, refusing to come out, no matter how gently Eleanor coaxed her. "I do not want another governess," Lily said, her small voice muffled by the curtain she had pulled around herself like a shield. "They always leave. Papa says it is because the house makes them sad, but I think it is because of me." Eleanor lowered herself to the floor, ignoring the way her skirts pooled around her, and sat cross-legged beside the window seat, as if she had nowhere else in the world to be. "It is not because of you," she said simply. "Houses can feel heavy sometimes, when there has been sadness in them. That is not your fault, and it is not something a little girl should carry on her shoulders." Lily peeked out from behind the curtain, studying Eleanor with the sharp, assessing eyes of a child who had learned not to trust easily. "Are you going to leave too?" "I made a promise to your father, and I made a promise to my own father before he died," Eleanor said. "I do not break my promises. So no, I am not planning to leave, not unless you decide you truly do not want me here." Something in Lily's expression softened, just slightly. She crawled out from behind the curtain and sat across from Eleanor, tucking her knees up to her chest. "Your father died too?" "Just a few weeks ago," Eleanor admitted, and for a moment, the careful composure she had worn since arriving at the manor cracked, revealing the raw grief underneath. "He was a doctor. He spent his whole life helping other people, and I miss him every single day." Lily was quiet for a long moment, turning this new information over in her small mind. "My mother died too. Papa does not like to talk about her. He gets very quiet, and sometimes he does not come out of his study for days." Eleanor felt her heart ache at the simple honesty of a child who had learned to read her father's grief the way other children learned their letters. "Grief is strange like that," she said carefully. "It makes even brave, strong people go quiet sometimes. It does not mean he loves you any less. It only means his heart is still healing." "Will your heart heal?" Lily asked. Eleanor thought of her father's letter, of the promise she had made, of the cold duke downstairs who carried his own grief like a fortress wall. "I hope so," she said honestly. "I think healing takes time, and patience, and people who are willing to sit with you while you find your way back to happiness. Perhaps we can help each other with that." From that morning onward, something between them began to shift. Lily, who had greeted every previous governess with suspicion and silence, found herself drawn to Eleanor's steady patience, her willingness to answer every question honestly, her refusal to treat grief as something shameful to be hidden away. Within 2 weeks, the nursery had transformed from a quiet, lonely room into a space filled with the sound of Lily's laughter, as Eleanor taught her not just reading and arithmetic, but the names of wildflowers in the garden, and simple songs her own mother had once sung to her. The Duke noticed the change before he was willing to admit it out loud. He would pass by the nursery in the evenings, on his way to his study, and hear his daughter's voice carrying down the hallway, bright and unguarded in a way he had not heard in years. He would pause outside the door sometimes, just to listen, though he never allowed himself to go inside. Eleanor, for her part, threw herself into more than just Lily's lessons. Within her first month at Ashford Manor, she had quietly begun reorganizing the household accounts, a skill she had learned helping her father manage his medical practice. She noticed immediately what she suspected the Duke already knew, but refused to face directly. The estate was hemorrhaging money through mismanaged tenant contracts, unnecessary staff wages, and years of neglected repairs that had only grown more expensive with time. She brought her findings to him one evening, finding him in his study with a glass of brandy he had barely touched, staring at the same ledgers that had haunted him for months. "You are paying your steward nearly double what similar estates pay for the same work," Eleanor said without preamble, setting a stack of papers on his desk. Your eastern tenant farms have not seen proper investment in 3 years, which means their yields are declining, which means your income from them keeps shrinking, and you are still paying wages to 4 staff members who left this house over a year ago. Sebastian looked up at her, startled by her directness. How do you know all this? I asked to see the ledgers. Your housekeeper was more than willing to share them, since apparently no one has properly reviewed them since your wife passed. Eleanor did not soften her words, though she watched his face carefully for any sign of the pain she knew she might be causing. Your Grace, I did not come here simply to teach your daughter her letters. If I am to become your wife, even in name only, I have no intention of watching this estate crumble around us when there are clear, practical solutions available. For a moment, Sebastian said nothing, simply staring at the papers she had laid before him, filled with her neat, careful handwriting, outlining exactly where the money was disappearing and exactly how it could be saved. He felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, a mixture of embarrassment that he had let things fall so far, and something like admiration for the woman standing before him, unafraid to name problems he had spent years avoiding. You have been busy, he said finally, a dry note entering his voice that was almost, though not quite, humor. I do not sit idle, Your Grace. It is not in my nature. Eleanor allowed herself a small, tired smile. My father used to say, I would have made a fine business manager had I been born a man. Since I was not, I suppose I will simply have to manage things quietly, from the shadows, the way women often must. Sebastian studied her for a long moment, and something in his cold reserve seemed to crack, just slightly. You are not what I expected, Miss Whitmore. What did you expect? I am not entirely certain. Someone quieter, perhaps. Someone who would simply exist in this house without disturbing its silence. He looked down at the papers again, at the careful, practical solutions she had outlined. You disturb quite a lot of things, it seems. Eleanor felt a flush rise in her cheeks, unsure whether his words were meant as criticism or something else entirely. Would you prefer I stopped? No, Sebastian said, and the word came out faster than he intended, surprising them both. He cleared his throat and looked back down at the ledgers, focusing on the numbers rather than the strange warmth that had crept into his chest. No, I think this house has been silent for far too long. Perhaps it needs disturbing. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's influence spread quietly through every corner of Ashford Manor. She spoke with the steward about renegotiating tenant contracts, always careful to frame her suggestions in ways that allowed Sebastian to make the final decisions, understanding that his pride, however buried under grief, still mattered to him. She reorganized the household staff, letting go of positions that no longer served a purpose, while ensuring every servant who remained was treated fairly and paid properly. She walked the eastern fields herself, speaking directly with tenant farmers who had grown used to being ignored, listening to their concerns with the same careful attention she gave to Lily's questions about the world. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the estate began to breathe again. The numbers in the ledgers, while still concerning, no longer painted such a grim picture. The tenants, who had grown resentful and distant under years of neglect, began to speak of the new mistress of the house with cautious hope, and Lily, who had once hidden beneath window seats from strangers, now ran through the halls calling Eleanor's name, eager to share whatever small discovery had captured her young imagination that day. Sebastian watched all of this unfold with a growing sense of unease that he could not quite name. He had agreed to this arrangement as a practical solution, a way to save his estate and give his daughter some semblance of stability. He had not expected to find himself watching Eleanor across the dinner table each evening, noticing the way her dark eyes lit up when she spoke about her plans for the tenant farms, the way she laughed, quiet and genuine, at Lily's stories about the garden fairies she claimed to have spotted near the old oak tree. He told himself it was simply relief, gratitude for the changes she had brought to his household. He told himself the warmth spreading through his chest whenever she entered a room was nothing more than the natural response to having competent help after years of struggling alone. He told himself many things, in the quiet hours of the night when sleep would not come, but none of them felt entirely true. One evening, nearly 2 months after her arrival, Eleanor found herself walking through the gardens after Lily had gone to bed, needing air and space to think through the tangled feelings she had been trying to ignore since her first night at Ashford Manor. She had come here with a clear purpose, A promise to keep. A practical arrangement to fulfill. She had not expected to find herself caring, truly caring, about the cold, grieving man who owned this house, or about the growing warmth in her chest whenever their eyes met across a room. She found Sebastian in the garden as well, standing near the old oak tree Lily so often spoke of, his hands clasped behind his back, staring up at the stars scattered across the clear night sky. "You are out late," Eleanor said, approaching cautiously. "I could say the same of you." Sebastian did not turn to look at her, though something in his posture shifted, acknowledging her presence. "I find I sleep better when I walk first. It has become something of a habit." Eleanor came to stand beside him, close enough to feel the quiet warmth radiating from him, despite the cool evening air. "This tree is where Lily claims to see fairies," she said, trying to lighten the strange tension that had settled between them. A small, unexpected smile touched Sebastian's lips, the first genuine smile Eleanor had seen from him since her arrival. Her mother used to tell her stories about fairies living in this garden. "I had forgotten that, until Lily mentioned it to me last week." He was quiet for a moment, his expression growing distant with memory. "I have not thought about those stories in years. I had almost forgotten the sound of her voice telling them." "I am sorry," Eleanor said softly. "I did not mean to bring up painful memories." "No." Sebastian turned to look at her then, his dark eyes searching her face in the moonlight. "It is not painful, not entirely. It is strange, remembering good things after so long spent only remembering the loss. I have you to thank for that, I think. You have brought life back into this house in ways I did not think possible." Eleanor's breath caught at the sincerity in his voice, at the way he was looking at her, as if truly seeing her for the first time since she had arrived. "I only did what needed doing," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "You did far more than that, Eleanor." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his low, quiet voice sent an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest. "I have watched you these past months, transforming this house, transforming my daughter's happiness, and I find myself wondering whether this arrangement we agreed upon might become something more than duty." The words hung between them in the cool night air, heavy with possibility and uncertainty. Eleanor's heart pounded as she searched his face, looking for any sign that he might regret speaking so openly, but found only quiet honesty in his expression. "Your Grace," she began carefully, "you told me on my first night here that you had nothing soft left to give, that this arrangement would only ever be practical." "I remember what I said." Sebastian's voice grew quieter, more uncertain than she had ever heard it. "I also remember believing it completely, at the time. I am no longer as certain as I once was." Before Eleanor could respond, a servant's voice called out from the manor, interrupting the fragile moment between them, with news of a visitor who had just arrived, unannounced and uninvited, claiming urgent business with Miss Whitmore. Eleanor felt a chill of unease settle over her, some instinct warning her that whatever peace she had found in these past 2 months was about to be tested in ways she was not yet prepared to face. She looked back at Sebastian one final time before turning to follow the servant back toward the house, and the expression on his face, a mixture of concern and something warmer he had not yet found the courage to name, stayed with her long after she had disappeared into the shadows of the manor, toward whatever trouble awaited her at the front door. The visitor waiting in the entrance hall was a tall, sharply dressed man with pale blonde hair and an easy, practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. Eleanor recognized him immediately from her father's occasional mentions, a neighboring landowner named Lord Pemberton, known throughout the county for his charm and his relentless pursuit of advantageous marriages. "Miss Whitmore," he said, bowing with exaggerated politeness, "I confess I did not expect to find you here, at Ashford Manor of all places, though the servants' gossip has reached even my estate." Eleanor kept her expression carefully neutral, though unease coiled in her stomach. "Lord Pemberton, I was not aware we were acquainted. We are not properly, though your father spoke of you often when he treated my mother during her final illness. He mentioned a daughter with a sharp mind and a stubborn heart, someone he hoped would find a match worthy of her intelligence." Pemberton's smile widened, though it still failed to reach his cold eyes. "I confess, I have come with a proposition, one your father, were he still alive, might have found quite favorable." Behind her, Eleanor heard Sebastian's footsteps entering the hall, his expression darkening as he took in the scene before him. "Pemberton," he said, his voice cool and formal. "This is an unexpected visit. Your Grace." Pemberton's bow to Sebastian was noticeably shallower than the one he had offered Eleanor, a small insult that did not go unnoticed by either of them. "I heard through the county that you had taken on Dr. Whitmore's daughter as a governess for your child. I must say, I find the arrangement rather curious, given the doctor's own hopes for his daughter's future." "What is it you want, Pemberton?" Sebastian's voice carried a warning edge that Eleanor had not heard from him before, sharp and protective in a way that made her chest tighten with an emotion she was not ready to examine. "I have come to offer Miss Whitmore a proper proposal of marriage," Pemberton said smoothly, as if the words were the most natural thing in the world. "Her father's lands, though modest, border my own estate quite conveniently. A union between our families would benefit us both considerably, and I am prepared to offer her a life far more comfortable than what she currently enjoys as a governess in someone else's household." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, part anger, part something else entirely. "Lord Pemberton, I appreciate the honesty of your offer, but I have no interest in a marriage arranged solely for the convenience of bordering lands." "Come now, Miss Whitmore," Pemberton said, his smile turning condescending. "You cannot possibly believe your position here offers you any real future. A governess, however skilled, remains a servant in the eyes of society. I am offering you a title, security, a proper place in the world that this arrangement can never provide. Miss Whitmore's future is her own to decide," Sebastian interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut through the tension in the hall. "And I believe she has already given you her answer." Pemberton's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the Duke, something calculating entering his expression. "Of course, Your Grace. Though I wonder if your interest in defending Miss Whitmore's choices runs deeper than simple concern for your daughter's governess." He let the implication hang in the air, deliberately provocative. "The county has already begun to whisper about the arrangement here, about a young, unmarried woman living under your roof, with no proper chaperone, no formal engagement to protect her reputation. I merely thought to offer her a respectable alternative before those whispers grow into something far more damaging." The threat, thinly veiled beneath polite words, landed with weight. Eleanor felt her stomach twist with dread, understanding immediately the danger Pemberton was hinting at. A woman's reputation, once damaged by gossip, could rarely be repaired, regardless of the truth behind the rumors. "I believe it is time for you to leave, Pemberton," Sebastian said, his voice dangerously quiet now. Pemberton offered one final bow, his smile never wavering, despite the clear dismissal. "As you wish, Your Grace. Miss Whitmore, should you reconsider my offer, my estate remains open to you. I would hate to see a woman of your talents wasted on an arrangement built on nothing more than a dead man's wishes and false hope." With that, he turned and departed, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Eleanor stood frozen for a long moment after the door closed behind him, her mind racing through the implications of what had just occurred. Sebastian turned to her, his expression a mixture of anger and something softer, something that looked almost like fear. "He is right about one thing," Eleanor said quietly, breaking the silence. "The county will talk, they likely already have." "Let them talk," Sebastian said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "It is easy for you to say that, Your Grace. You have a title to protect you from scandal. I have only my name and my father's memory, and neither will survive if the wrong rumors take hold." Eleanor's voice trembled slightly, the weight of her precarious position settling over her fully, for the first time since she had arrived at Ashford Manor. Sebastian stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Then we will make the arrangement formal, sooner than we planned. I will not have your reputation destroyed because of gossip and Pemberton's petty jealousy." Eleanor searched his face, looking for any sign that his words came from genuine care rather than simple obligation. "Is that truly what you want, Your Grace? Or are you simply trying to solve a problem, the way you have solved every other problem I have brought to your attention these past months?" The question hung between them, sharper than she intended, but Sebastian did not flinch from it. "I told you in the garden that this arrangement had become something more than duty to me. I meant it, Eleanor. Pemberton's visit does not change that. If anything, It has made me realize how much I fear losing what we have begun to build here." Before Eleanor could respond, a far more troubling development unfolded over the following days, one that would test the fragile trust growing between them in ways neither had anticipated. Rumors began circulating through the county, whispered among servants and gentry alike, reviving old suspicions about the death of the previous Duchess 3 years earlier. Some claimed Sebastian had refused to call for proper medical help in time, choosing pride over his wife's safety. Others suggested darker things entirely, hinting at negligence born from a marriage that had grown cold long before her death. Eleanor first heard the rumors from the housekeeper, who relayed them with obvious reluctance, clearly uncomfortable repeating such damaging gossip about her employer. "It is not true, Miss Whitmore," the housekeeper insisted. His Grace was beside himself with grief. "I was there. I saw how he cared for her, how he fought to save her. But grief makes people cruel sometimes, and there are those in the county who have always resented the Ashford family's wealth and position." Eleanor found Sebastian in his study that evening, the familiar sight of him surrounded by ledgers and dying firelight now tinged with a new tension. He looked up as she entered, and something in her expression must have betrayed what she had heard, because his face immediately closed off, retreating behind the same cold walls he had shown her on her first night at the manor. "You have heard the rumors," he said, his voice flat. "I have heard whispers, not truth. I came to ask you directly, rather than believe gossip." Eleanor kept her voice steady, though her heart pounded with uncertainty. "What happened to your wife, Sebastian?" The use of his given name, the first time she had spoken it so plainly, seemed to catch him off guard. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply staring into the fire as if the memories lived within the flames themselves. "She went into labor early," he finally said, his voice rough with old pain. "2 months before her time, the physician who attended her, not your father, unfortunately, but a man from the city I had trusted based on his reputation, made an error in judgment. He waited too long to recognize the danger, too long to intervene properly. By the time your father arrived, having been sent for in desperation, it was already too late to save her." Eleanor felt her chest tighten with grief, for a woman she had never known, and for the man before her, who had carried this weight alone for 3 years. "That was not your fault, Sebastian. You could not have known the physician would fail her." "I chose him," Sebastian said, his voice breaking slightly. "I trusted his reputation over your father's genuine skill, because your father was not fashionable enough, not connected enough to the right circles. My pride killed her, Eleanor, as surely as if I had made the error myself." "That is not true, and you know it is not true," Eleanor said fiercely, moving closer to him, her earlier caution forgotten in the face of his obvious pain. "You made a reasonable choice with the information you had. No one could have predicted that physician's failure. You have spent 3 years punishing yourself for a tragedy that was never your fault, and it has cost you your happiness, your daughter's happiness, nearly everything you hold dear." Sebastian looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with a raw vulnerability she had never seen from him before. "How can you be certain?" "Because I have spent my entire life watching my father heal people, and watching him fail sometimes too, despite his skill and his dedication. Medicine is not perfect, Sebastian. Doctors are not perfect. Tragedy happens even when everyone involved does everything they possibly can." Eleanor reached out, taking his hand in hers, the first time she had touched him so intimately since her arrival. "You do not deserve to carry this guilt any longer." For a moment, neither of them moved, the weight of years of grief and guilt hanging in the space between them, finally beginning to loosen its grip. But the fragile peace of that moment was shattered the following morning, when Eleanor discovered that the rumors had grown far more damaging overnight, now suggesting that she herself had somehow influenced the Duke's decision-making, that her presence in the household proved some scandalous truth about his character, that a respectable woman would never remain unmarried under a widower's roof unless something improper was occurring between them. The final blow came when Eleanor received a letter from a distant cousin, warning her that the gossip had reached London itself, that her father's good name was being dragged through scandal alongside her own, that the reputation he had spent his entire life building as a respected physician was now at risk of ruin because of rumors surrounding his daughter's residence at Ashford Manor. Eleanor confronted Sebastian with the letter clutched in her trembling hands, her earlier tenderness replaced by fear and frustration. This cannot continue, Sebastian. My father's memory, everything he worked for, is being destroyed because of gossip neither of us can control. Then we will announce our engagement immediately, Sebastian said firmly. That will silence the rumors. Will it? Eleanor's voice rose with barely contained emotion. Or will it simply confirm what everyone already suspects, that this arrangement was built on convenience and desperation, rather than genuine affection? I will not have my father's legacy tied to a marriage built on pity and practicality. Is that truly what you believe this has become? Sebastian's voice carried genuine hurt now, the walls he had begun to lower fully erected once more. After everything these past months, you believe I offer marriage now only out of obligation? I do not know what to believe anymore, Eleanor admitted, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, despite her efforts to remain composed. I came here to fulfill a promise to my dying father. I did not expect to find myself caring for you, for Lily, for this entire household, only to watch it all threatened by scandal and gossip I cannot control. Perhaps Pemberton was right. Perhaps I was foolish to believe this arrangement could ever become something real. The words, spoken in a moment of raw fear and exhaustion, landed like a physical blow. Sebastian's expression closed off completely, retreating behind the same cold distance he had shown her on their very first meeting. If that is truly how you feel, Miss Whitmore, then perhaps it would be best if you reconsidered your position here entirely, he said, his voice devoid of the warmth she had grown accustomed to over the past months. I will not force you to remain in an arrangement you regret. Eleanor opened her mouth to explain, to take back words spoken in fear rather than truth, but Sebastian had already turned away, retreating to the window, his back rigid with wounded pride. She left the study without another word, her heart breaking with every step, unable to find the courage to fix what her fear had just broken between them. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her room, staring at her father's final letter, rereading his words about duty and second chances, and the family he believed she could help heal. She thought of Lily, asleep in the nursery, unaware that the fragile happiness she had found might soon be taken from her again. She thought of Sebastian, alone in his study, carrying grief and guilt that she had only just begun to help him release. And she began, slowly and painfully, to pack her belongings, believing that leaving Ashford Manor was the only way to protect everyone from further hurt, even as every instinct in her heart screamed that she was making a terrible mistake. A scream pierced the quiet of the manor just before dawn, and Eleanor was on her feet before she fully understood what had woken her. She recognized the sound instantly, the panicked voice of a nursemaid calling for help, and she ran from her half-packed room without bothering to grab a shawl, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor as she raced toward the nursery. Lily lay curled on her bed, her small body trembling with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid in a way that sent immediate alarm through Eleanor's chest. The nursemaid stood beside the bed, wringing her hands helplessly, tears streaming down her face. She woke up burning hot, Miss Whitmore, and she cannot seem to catch her breath properly. I sent for His Grace immediately. Eleanor pushed past her fear and grief from the night before, falling immediately into the calm, practiced focus her father had taught her since childhood. She pressed her hand to Lily's forehead, feeling the alarming heat radiating from the child's small body, and listened carefully to the wet, rattling sound of her breathing. Fetch cool water and clean cloths immediately, Eleanor said, her voice steady and commanding, despite the fear pounding in her chest. And send someone for the local physician, though I do not believe we can wait for him to arrive before beginning treatment. Sebastian burst into the room moments later, his face pale with terror, his composed exterior completely shattered at the sight of his daughter struggling to breathe. What is happening? What is wrong with her? Her lungs sound congested, and the fever is dangerously high, Eleanor said, already working to remove Lily's heavy nightgown, replacing it with something lighter to help cool her overheated body. This looks like the same illness my father treated countless times in the village, a severe chest infection that can turn fatal quickly in children, if not managed properly. Fatal? Sebastian's voice cracked on the word, memories of his wife's death clearly flooding back to him in this moment of fresh terror. Not if we act quickly and correctly, Eleanor said firmly, meeting his eyes with as much confidence as she could manage despite her own fear. I watched my father treat this exact illness dozens of times. I know what needs to be done. I need you to trust me, Sebastian, completely and without hesitation, or we may lose precious time she cannot afford to lose. Something in her steady, unwavering confidence seemed to anchor him, pulling him back from the edge of panic that had gripped him at the sight of his daughter's suffering. "Tell me what to do," he said. For the next several hours, Eleanor worked tirelessly, applying cool compresses to bring down Lily's fever, propping the child up carefully to ease her labored breathing, mixing a tincture from her father's old medical bag that she had brought with her from her childhood home, never imagining she would need such supplies here at Ashford Manor. Sebastian stayed by her side the entire time, following her instructions without question, holding his daughter's small hand and whispering words of comfort, even as terror gripped his heart. The local physician arrived nearly 2 hours after being summoned, examining Lily briefly, before confirming what Eleanor had already diagnosed and begun treating. "Whatever you have been doing, Miss Whitmore, continue exactly as you have been," the physician said, clearly impressed by the care already administered. "You have likely saved this child's life through your quick action. Another hour of delay, and I fear the outcome might have been very different." As the morning wore on, Lily's fever finally began to break, her breathing gradually easing into something more normal and less frightening. By midday, she had fallen into a peaceful, healing sleep, her small chest rising and falling steadily beneath the light blanket Eleanor had tucked around her. Sebastian sat beside his daughter's bed for a long time after the crisis had passed, watching her sleep, his hand still wrapped protectively around hers. Eleanor moved to leave the room, giving him privacy with his daughter, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Please, stay," he said quietly, not looking up from Lily's sleeping face. "I do not think I can properly express what I am feeling right now, but I know I do not want you to leave this room, not yet." Eleanor returned to sit beside him, exhaustion finally catching up with her, now that the immediate danger had passed. For a long while, neither of them spoke, simply watching Lily sleep, the fragile peace of the moment settling over them both like a healing balm after the terror of the morning. "I nearly lost her," Sebastian finally said, his voice hollow with the weight of what might have happened. "And all I could think, in those terrible moments before you arrived, was that I could not survive losing another person I love. Not after Margaret, not Lily too." "You did not lose her," Eleanor said gently. "She is safe now, and she will recover fully. Because of you." Sebastian finally turned to look at her, his dark eyes filled with an emotion so raw and unguarded that Eleanor felt her breath catch in her throat. "Because you knew exactly what to do, because you stayed calm when I could not, because you have brought a kind of steady strength into this house that I did not realize how desperately we needed until this very moment." "I only did what my father taught me," Eleanor said softly, though her heart pounded at the intensity in his gaze. "You did far more than that." Sebastian reached out, taking her hand in his touch gentle, despite the exhaustion clearly weighing on him. "Eleanor, I have spent 3 years believing I was responsible for taking a mother from my daughter, believing I did not deserve happiness after failing Margaret so completely. But watching you these past hours, watching how fiercely you fought to save Lily's life, I finally understand what your father was trying to tell me in his letter. He was not simply asking me to find a practical wife to manage my household. He was asking me to let myself heal, to let myself love again, even after everything I had lost." Eleanor felt tears gathering in her eyes, the events of the previous night's argument suddenly feeling impossibly distant compared to the raw honesty passing between them now. "Sebastian, about what I said last night, I did not mean it. I was afraid of the scandal, afraid of losing my father's good name, but mostly afraid of how much I had come to care for you and for Lily, more than I ever intended when I first arrived here." "I know," Sebastian said softly. "I understand fear better than most men, having lived within its grip for 3 long years. But I do not want to live in fear any longer, Eleanor. I do not want to lose you the way I lost Margaret, through silence and pride and grief I refused to properly face." "I began packing my things last night," Eleanor admitted quietly. "I believed leaving was the only way to protect everyone from further hurt." "Please do not leave," Sebastian said, his voice breaking with an emotion he had kept buried for far too long. "Not because of some promise made to your father, not out of obligation or practicality, but because I have fallen in love with you, Eleanor Whitmore, somewhere between your fierce arguments about tenant farms and your patient afternoons teaching my daughter about garden fairies. I did not expect to feel this way again, not after everything I lost, but I cannot deny it any longer. Not after watching you save my daughter's life with such fierce, unwavering devotion. Eleanor felt the last of her carefully guarded defenses crumble entirely at his words, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, as 3 months of fear and hope and carefully suppressed feeling finally broke free. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have loved you since that first night in your study, when you looked at me as though I might actually be capable of helping you heal, rather than simply being another burden to manage. Sebastian reached up, gently wiping away her tears with his thumb, his touch tender in a way that made Eleanor's heart ache with the depth of feeling she saw reflected in his dark eyes. Then stay, he said softly. Not as a practical arrangement, not to fulfill a dying man's wishes, but because you want to build a future here, with me and with Lily, built on genuine love, rather than mere convenience. Before Eleanor could respond, a small, sleepy voice interrupted them from the bed. Are you two finally going to get married? Lily asked, her eyes still heavy with the lingering effects of fever, but bright with unmistakable hope. I have been waiting for weeks for Papa to stop being so silly about it. Despite the exhaustion and emotion of the past hours, both Sebastian and Eleanor found themselves laughing, the sound filling the nursery with a warmth that had been absent from Ashford Manor for far too long. Sebastian moved to sit beside his daughter, gently smoothing her hair back from her forehead, checking automatically for any remaining fever. Would you like that, sweetheart? Would you like Eleanor to become part of our family properly? Lily's answering smile, weak but genuine, held all the answer either adult needed. I would like that very much, Papa. She makes the house feel less lonely. She makes you smile again too, even when you think I am not watching. That evening, once Lily had fallen into a deep, healing sleep, and the local physician had confirmed she would make a full recovery within days, Sebastian found Eleanor in the garden once more, standing beneath the old oak tree where they had first spoken so openly of their growing feelings weeks earlier. He approached quietly, watching her for a moment in the moonlight before speaking. I owe you an apology, he said, for the words I spoke last night, in anger and wounded pride rather than truth. We both spoke words we did not mean, Eleanor replied, turning to face him with a soft, tired smile. Fear makes fools of even the most sensible people, it seems. Sebastian closed the distance between them, taking both her hands in his own. I do not want to waste another moment living in fear, Eleanor. I have already lost enough time to grief and guilt and pride. I want to build something real with you, something rooted in love rather than mere practicality. He paused, his expression growing suddenly nervous, despite everything they had already confessed to each other. Eleanor Whitmore, will you marry me? Not because your father asked it of me, and not because Pemberton's rumors demand it, but because I cannot imagine my life, or Lily's life, without you in it any longer. Eleanor felt joy bloom in her chest, warm and certain in a way she had not expected to feel again after her father's death had left her world feeling so uncertain and gray. Yes, she said softly, tears of happiness now replacing the tears of fear from earlier that day. Yes, Sebastian, I will marry you, gladly and completely, with my whole heart. As Sebastian pulled her into his arms beneath the branches of the old oak tree, the same tree where Lily claimed fairies danced on quiet evenings, Eleanor felt certain that her father's final wish had been granted in ways far greater than he could have possibly imagined when he wrote that letter, urging her toward Ashford Manor. What had begun as a practical arrangement born from a dying man's hope had transformed, through months of shared grief and quiet courage, into something far more precious than either of them had dared to hope for, a genuine, unshakable love, strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds of loss. News of the engagement spread through the county faster than any rumor Pemberton had ever managed to spread himself, and to Eleanor's great relief, the truth of a genuine love match silenced the scandalous whispers far more effectively than any hastily arranged marriage of convenience ever could have. Neighbors who had once gossiped about impropriety now spoke instead of the touching devotion between the widowed duke and the physician's clever daughter, a story that seemed to capture the imagination of the entire county within days. Preparations for the wedding began almost immediately, Though Eleanor insisted on a modest ceremony, rather than the grand spectacle Sebastian's position might have demanded. "I did not fall in love with a title," she told him one evening, as they reviewed guest lists together in his study, now transformed from a place of grief into a warm, shared space filled with laughter and easy companionship. "I fell in love with you, and with the family we are building together. I would rather celebrate that quietly, surrounded by people who genuinely matter to us, than host some grand affair meant only to impress society." Sebastian agreed readily, relieved to find his intended bride shared his own growing distaste for the empty formalities of high society that had once defined so much of his life. Instead, they planned a small ceremony in the manor's own chapel, attended only by close friends, trusted servants who had become like family over the years, and the tenant families whose lives Eleanor had worked so tirelessly to improve during her months at Ashford Manor. Lily, fully recovered from her illness and practically vibrating with excitement, insisted on choosing her own role in the ceremony. "I want to walk down first, before Eleanor, scattering flower petals," she declared one afternoon, twirling around the drawing room in an imagined preview of her important duty. "And I want to help choose the flowers too, because I know exactly which ones smell the nicest." "You shall have whatever role makes you happiest," Eleanor promised, scooping the delighted child into a warm embrace, marveling at how naturally this small, once lonely girl had become as dear to her heart as if she had been born her own daughter. Not everyone in the county celebrated the upcoming union with such genuine warmth, however. Lord Pemberton, humiliated by Eleanor's rejection of his proposal, and further embarrassed by the public revelation of genuine love between the Duke and his intended bride, had grown increasingly bitter in the weeks following the engagement announcement. Rumors reached Ashford Manor that he had begun spreading fresh gossip throughout London, this time targeting Sebastian's business dealings, suggesting financial improprieties that simply did not exist, hoping to damage the Duke's reputation enough to somehow salvage his own wounded pride. Sebastian, once a man who might have retreated into anxious silence at such threats, now faced the challenge with a newfound confidence born from the stability and support Eleanor had brought into his life. "Let him spread his lies," he told Eleanor calmly one evening, reviewing correspondence from concerned business associates who had heard the troubling rumors. "The ledgers you helped me organize tell a very different story than whatever fiction Pemberton is inventing. Anyone who takes the time to properly investigate will find nothing but honest, careful management, thanks entirely to your efforts these past months." True to Sebastian's prediction, Pemberton's attempts at further scandal quickly collapsed under the weight of simple, verifiable truth. Several prominent members of London society, having heard the false rumors, took the trouble to inquire directly with Sebastian's banking associates, only to discover an estate that had transformed dramatically over recent months from near ruin into a model of careful, prosperous management. Far from damaging Sebastian's reputation, Pemberton's petty attempts at revenge only served to highlight the impressive turnaround Eleanor had helped orchestrate, earning both her and Sebastian even greater respect throughout the county. Humiliated once again, and having exhausted whatever social capital his wounded pride might have still commanded, Pemberton eventually withdrew from local society altogether, retreating to his estate to nurse his damaged reputation in private. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only quiet relief that his petty schemes could no longer threaten the happiness she had fought so hard to build. As the wedding day approached, Eleanor found herself reflecting often on the strange path that had led her to this moment. From her father's deathbed promise to the cold reception she had first received in Sebastian's study, through months of careful trust-building, painful misunderstanding, and finally, genuine, unshakable love. She wished desperately that her father could witness the happiness she had found, could see how his final wish for her future had blossomed into something far more beautiful than a simple practical arrangement. The night before the wedding, unable to sleep amid the nervous excitement building within her, Eleanor found herself once again in the manor's study, sitting at the desk where she had first confronted Sebastian months earlier. She pulled her father's final letter from where she had kept it, carefully preserved, rereading his familiar handwriting one final time before the ceremony that would forever change her life. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I have already passed from this world, and I find myself filled with peace rather than sorrow at that thought. knowing you carry within you everything I have tried to teach you about kindness, resilience, and the courage to help others, even when the path forward seems uncertain. I have asked something significant of you in requesting that you seek out the Duke of Ashford, and I understand this request may seem strange, even unreasonable, coming from beyond the grave. But I have watched that good man struggle beneath the weight of grief for 3 long years now, watched his daughter grow increasingly isolated within the walls of a house that should be filled with warmth and laughter, rather than silence and sorrow. I have also watched you, my dear daughter, spend your own life caring endlessly for others, while denying yourself the simple happiness of being cared for in return. I do not ask you to sacrifice your own future for the sake of practical arrangement alone. I ask only that you offer the Duke and his daughter the same patient kindness you have always shown every patient who came through our door seeking healing. I believe with all my heart that healing works both ways, that in helping this broken family find their way back to happiness, you might also discover the love and belonging you have always deserved, but rarely allowed yourself to seek. Whatever path this letter sets you upon, know that I am immensely proud of the woman you have become, and I trust completely in your good judgment to find your own way toward happiness, whatever form that happiness might ultimately take. With all my love, always, your father. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, tears streaming down her face, though these tears carried none of the sharp grief of earlier months, only a deep, grateful peace. Her father had known, somehow, exactly what she needed even before she understood it herself. He had sent her toward healing not just for a grieving family, but for her own heart as well. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, unusually warm sunshine breaking through weeks of gray autumn clouds, as if the universe itself wished to celebrate the joyful occasion. Eleanor dressed carefully in a simple gown of pale blue silk, nothing so extravagant as fashionable London brides might have chosen, but elegant in its simplicity, reflecting the genuine, unpretentious love that had brought her to this moment. Lily, radiant with excitement in her small white dress, scattered flower petals down the aisle of the manor's chapel, exactly as she had planned, her small face beaming with a happiness that touched everyone in attendance. Sebastian, waiting at the altar in his finest formal attire, watched his daughter's joyful procession with visible emotion, before his gaze lifted to catch sight of Eleanor entering the chapel, and the expression that crossed his face in that moment, pure, overwhelming love and gratitude, would remain etched in Eleanor's memory for the rest of her days. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of joy and quiet emotion, the vows they exchanged carrying weight far beyond simple tradition, representing months of hard-won trust, shared grief transformed into shared healing, and love that had grown genuine and strong from unlikely beginnings. When Sebastian finally kissed his bride before the small gathering of witnesses, the chapel erupted in warm applause, tenant families and household staff alike celebrating alongside them, having watched this remarkable transformation unfold throughout the estate over recent months. The modest celebration that followed in the manor's great hall carried none of the stiff formality of typical society weddings, instead filled with genuine warmth, easy laughter, and the kind of unguarded joy that comes only from celebrations built on authentic happiness, rather than social obligation. Tenant farmers who had once viewed the distant, grieving Duke with wary uncertainty now raised their glasses in genuine celebration, having witnessed firsthand the positive changes brought about by his new Duchess's careful, compassionate management of the estate. As evening settled over Ashford Manor, Eleanor found herself standing once more beneath the old oak tree in the garden, now wearing her wedding ring, watching as Sebastian lifted a sleepy Lily into his arms, the exhausted but happy child having danced and celebrated well beyond her usual bedtime. He carried his daughter toward the house, pausing briefly to look back at Eleanor, with a smile that held none of the coldness or grief she had witnessed on their first meeting months earlier. "Are you coming, wife?" he called softly, the words still carrying a note of wondering disbelief, as if he could hardly believe his own good fortune in finding happiness again, after so many years of believing it lost to him forever. "In a moment," Eleanor replied, smiling as she watched her husband carry their daughter toward the warm, welcoming lights of the manor, a house that had transformed from a place of silent grief into a genuine home filled with love and laughter. She lingered beneath the oak tree a moment longer, looking up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, thinking once more of her father, of the promise she had made him, of the unlikely, beautiful path that promise had led her toward. She had come to Ashford Manor, believing she was fulfilling a dying man's practical request, offering her skills and sensibility to help a struggling family find stability once more. She had never imagined, on that stormy first night, that she would find genuine love waiting for her within these walls. Love strong enough to heal years of accumulated grief and guilt, strong enough to transform an entire household from silence into warmth. In the months that followed their wedding, Ashford Manor continued to flourish under Eleanor's careful management and Sebastian's renewed engagement with his responsibilities as both landowner and father. The tenant farms Eleanor had worked so hard to improve began yielding their best harvests in years, the estate's finances stabilizing enough that Sebastian could finally set aside the anxious worry that had haunted him for so long. Lily grew into a bright, confident child, no longer hiding beneath window seats from strangers, but instead running joyfully through the halls and gardens of a home now filled with the laughter and warmth she had always deserved. Eleanor often thought back to that first stormy night, to her own nervous determination as she had walked into Sebastian's study carrying nothing but a dead man's letter and a fierce belief in the promise she had made. She had not known then how completely that single decision would transform not just Sebastian's life and Lily's future, but her own heart as well, opening her to a love she had never expected to find, built not on practical convenience, but on genuine understanding, shared healing, and unwavering devotion. One evening, nearly a year after their wedding, as Eleanor sat with Sebastian in the same study where their story had first begun, now filled with warm firelight, and the comfortable silence of genuine partnership rather than cold formality, she found herself smiling at the memory of her father's final letter. "Do you ever think about what my father wrote to you?" she asked, curled comfortably beside her husband as he worked through the estate's now healthy ledgers. Sebastian looked up, his expression warm with the easy contentment that had become so natural to him over recent months. "Often," he admitted, "he wrote that I needed a wife, and I remember thinking, at the time, that he could not possibly understand what he was asking of me, could not understand the depth of grief I carried, or believe that any woman could help heal wounds so deep." "And now?" Eleanor asked softly. "Now I understand he knew exactly what he was asking, and exactly who could accomplish it," Sebastian said, reaching out to gently tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "He was right, Eleanor. I did need a wife, though I did not understand at the time how much more than practical arrangement I truly needed. I needed you, specifically, with your fierce intelligence and your patient kindness, and your refusal to let me hide behind grief any longer than necessary." Eleanor felt her heart swell with the same deep gratitude and love that had grown steadily since her arrival at Ashford Manor, all those months ago. "My father always did have remarkable judgment about people," she said, smiling softly. "I suppose I should simply be grateful he recognized what we needed, even before we understood it ourselves." "I am grateful every single day," Sebastian said, pulling her close. "Not just for your father's wisdom in bringing us together, but for your own courage in walking through that door on such a stormy night, carrying nothing but determination and a promise you refused to break." As the fire crackled warmly beside them, and their daughter's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere upstairs, Eleanor rested her head against her husband's shoulder, filled with a deep, settled peace she had never expected to find when she first arrived at Ashford Manor, carrying grief for her father, and uncertainty about the future awaiting her. What had begun as a practical arrangement, a dying man's hopeful request whispered across a threshold on a stormy night, had blossomed into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. A genuine, lasting love, strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds, resilient enough to weather scandal and grief and uncertainty, and true enough to last for the rest of their lives together. The house that had once known only silence and sorrow now echoed daily with laughter, warmth, and the quiet, steady happiness of a family built not on convenience or obligation, but on genuine love discovered in the most unexpected of circumstances. And though her father had not lived to see the beautiful family his final wish had helped create, Eleanor knew, with complete certainty, that he would have been proud beyond words to witness the happiness that had grown from his simple, hopeful letter and the promise his daughter had so faithfully kept.